The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
I'm a military brat from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, so my dad was a Navy man. So I grew up on military bases, so pretty easy transition when you think in terms of life in the military to life in the Mounted Police. But a cousin of mine joined the force about 3 years before I did, so that's really when I got motivated. And I applied for the RCMP at Dartmouth, Nova Scotia when I was 17. I tried to apply when I was 17, and they told me to come back when I was 18. And so I went back when I was 18, and here I am, you know, and I was successful. The interesting thing, though, when I think about it, which is a cute story, is that I remember I wear glasses today, and I wore glasses then. And you think back to the early '70s, like I joined in February 1974. Of course, we have vision requirements. There's no such thing as laser eye surgery in those days. And I think one of my eyes was a little weak, and they deferred me temporarily while I went to see a specialist. And I always wondered, did I slip through the cracks? Or did my eyes meet the requirement? Like, we'll never know. And so I joined in '74. Oh, actually, during the application process, they asked me, would you like to learn to speak French? Now, you think about it for a minute. Anybody that wants to join any organization, when they offer up a question like that, the obvious answer is, absolutely, I'd love to learn to speak French. And so I took this test in Swahili like they did in those days, and they said I had the aptitude. So I was initially going to join the RCMP in October of '73, but deferred until the new year, the new calendar year of '74, because they were starting a bilingual troop. And so I signed up in February 1974. I went to Ottawa and studied French for 3 months, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. And then from Ottawa, I went to Depot for my basic training. And in those days, of course, we were all males. We're still in the era when women weren't part of the organization. And our troop was completely split in terms of 16 Francophones and 16 Anglophones. And from the onset, we knew, in all likelihood, the English people would move upon graduation to a French community, likely in Quebec or New Brunswick, and the French people would move to English communities. But our training was half in English and half in French. So by way of example, you'd have a law class. I don't know how many hours were in the law program in 1974. And one class would be English, the next class would be French, and they alternated like that for the whole of the program. In every discipline, whether it was drill, self-defense, PT, was exactly the same, firearms. So the instructors were bilingual, and they alternated class from English to French for the whole of the training program. And upon graduation, I moved to Quebec. All of us were 19. The vast majority of people were 19. I recall we had one guy that was, I think, 25. And a couple of guys that were 21 or 22, but everybody else was just 19. And most of it was all physically based in terms of the training program itself. I mean, swimming and self-defense and PT. There was law, but I got to be careful not to jump forward to where I know the program evolved over time. So it was more physical than anything. And as a 19-year-old kid, you know, I played a lot of sports in my lifetime. I found training to be quite easy. Academically, it wasn't difficult. Interesting to think, though, during training in 1974, I started basic training in May and graduated in November. And in September of that year, that's when the first female troop started. And I recall one of the ladies in the troop happened to have been also a military brat and lived in the same part of Dartmouth as we had. But I guess more unique is that we had a troop mate whose sister was in the first female troop. And that's something I think that I'll always remember. That was pretty cool when I look back at that. And but training was, you know, when you look back at your training experience as a young man, you don't remember that much, but you do remember were some of the good times and some of the things that you maybe got away with that you shouldn't have. But in terms of police skills, when I left training, I didn't know very much. We didn't know very much in 1974. And most of what we learned would have been post-graduation in terms of if you were lucky to get a trainer, and you learned on the streets of Canada somewhere in one of the many detachments you had across the country. All of the English guys in our troop went to Montreal for 3 weeks, and then from there they dispersed us to detachments. So I ended up in a place called St. George de Beauce, which is about an hour's drive south of Quebec City. And it is a town of, I think it was around 21,000, and I was the only English person in that town that I knew of. So I went there with my language training of 3 months, my 6 months basic training, where you alternate classes English and French, and I had to learn on the job, so to speak. And you know, in a non-contract division, Quebec in those days, you know, we did primarily all federal statutes work, which is a lot of custom and excise and a lot of drug work. And so very different from my experience of contract policing in subsequent years. But I know I learned to speak French very well because when I left Quebec, I spoke some good English words with a funny accent, and it took a while to lose that accent. And I still, of course, speak French to this day. The things that are unique about my experience in C Division or Quebec, St. George, was the realization that one day I could speak French, like speaking English. I remember reading some correspondence that came from division headquarters, and I read it, and I turned it over to read it again, and I realized I was reading English, but I didn't even realize I was reading French on the page before. I remember that. That for me stands out, how well the language training, the basic training, and the assimilation in the French community enabled someone like me to actually learn the language so very well. But from an operational perspective, I remember the personalities of my trainer. I remember him like it was yesterday, an outstanding guy, originally from New Brunswick, and just a fantastic man. He had a love for life that was just amazing. He ended up marrying a local girl and ended up in Quebec City, in a unit in Quebec City, a guy by the name of Bernard Theriault. So I remember him, I can still see his face today. He was a pretty amazing man. Well, I started off in Winnipeg, at Winnipeg Detachment it was called in those days. And of course, the first thing you do when you get any place is where the heck you're going to live. Well, all the young single guys that were hanging around had a place called Gertrude's Place. And it was an old 3-story house south of the river there, not far from subdivision, and we had 6 guys living there. So you can imagine 6 young members working in different places in subdivision, all living in the same house. We called it Gertrude's because it was on Gertrude Avenue. So that was my introduction to Winnipeg. And we did a lot of, when I went to Winnipeg, in Winnipeg Detachment in those days, we did a lot of what, I think in subsequent years, a lot of what, as GIS grew and evolved, what they did. So interviewed all the victims, did a lot of NOKs, did all the warrants in the city. So you ended up going into every dive in the city of Winnipeg, down in the core district, looking for people that are wanted from all the communities outside of the city. And that was my introduction to uniform policing. So I didn't really have a trainer, and I sort of learned as I went. And I guess I got lucky a few times, and I was only there for about maybe 16, 17 months before I moved on to St. Pierre, Manitoba, which is about a half hour south of Winnipeg. I don't know if you know the province at all. And St. Pierre is a French community, so it was good for me. And so I was there for 3 years. And I was, one day I was going to be there forever, a little while, because I was going to get married a local girl. And talked to the OC, and because they said I needed to be transferred to the beach detachment for the summer. And you know, the section NCO came in and saw me, and he said, tell you what, Bob, we need a guy with your experience and you know, your presence. We need a guy like you out at Grand Beach, Grand Marais for the summer months. And I, of course, told them it was BS. They just were looking for a single guy, any single guy, to send to this location. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? And so I went and saw the OC and said, listen, here it is, May. I'm getting married in September. Where am I going to be when the summer's over? He said, I assure you, you're going to be back in St. Pierre and you can plan your life around that. I said, good. So in Manitoba, we staffed the summer detachments on the May long weekend. So I went out on a Friday to start my first shift. And the section NCO there came up and saw me right away. He said, listen, Bob, he says, I know the OC said you're going back to St. Pierre, but I'll tell you what, that's not going to happen. We'd like you to go to a detachment just Powerview, Pine Falls, just east of Grand Beach. And a good friend of mine just went up there as the sergeant. And I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to talk to my wife. I can't see that being a problem. I mean, after all, what choice do you have when you're a young constable? But I'll confirm that with you after the weekend, if that's okay with you. So I called my buddy and said, listen, they want me to go there. I'll tell my wife, and so we'll be there after we get married in September. And so after the weekend, I called him, and he said, well, actually, there's been a change of plans again. He says, you're not going to go to Powerview. We're going to send you to the PAW. So, I mean, that's twice now in my young service that I was going one place and going someplace else. And again, you know, if you think back to how fluid transfers were in those days, that wasn't uncommon to one day be going nowhere, the next day to be going to a new place, and then a change of heart and sending you somewhere else. So when we got married, we took off to the PAW, Manitoba, which was a fantastic place. Absolutely loved it. And I spent 3 years there. Our firstborn was born in the PAW. In fact, when I was in the PAW, I ended up being, a little bit of trivia, I guess, I was the first ever GI guy in the PAW Canada in its history of the force in that town. So I had a lot of fun in the PAW, and fantastic police work. And you got to do absolutely everything in a place like that. And then we left there, and I ended up in Neepawa, Manitoba, which is on the Yellowhead, which is absolutely one of the prettiest towns in the province of Manitoba. And my old boss in the PAW, just before I ended up getting transferred out of the PAW, my wife and I stopped in and visited him in Winnipeg when we went down to see her family. And he told me that, he said, you know, Bob, you were being considered for a position in staffing in Winnipeg. They wanted to bring you in as a corporal, but unfortunately, you've got the wrong attitude. You're way too cocky, and you just have to settle down and be a little more easygoing. And afterwards, my wife said to me, and this is so funny, you know, she said, you need to be more like a friend of ours stationed in the PAW at the time and stationed in a couple places with us, Hal Dunphy, who just was easygoing and got along with everybody, never challenged anybody, or never challenged authority. You should be more like Hal. And I remember that conversation my wife and I had, and not that very long ago I said to her, so it turned out all right though, didn't it, in the end, in terms of how it went with my career. When I was in the PAW, I had a staffing interview, and I wanted to come to depot. So this would have been 1982, I would have come to depot. 83, when I left the PAW, I would have come to depot as an instructor. That was my first desire, to go to training academy, to depot division, and be an instructor in the academic center. And but unfortunately, things were shutting down at depot. So instead of going to depot, I had a little bit of a disagreement with staffing about where I would end up, but the path led me to Neepawa. And then from Neepawa, I did finally get to depot as an instructor back in 1989, as an instructor in ops training, operational training unit in the academic center. And I spent 4 years there. I tried to get out after 3, but they wouldn't let me go. I guess I was doing a good job. And so I managed to get out in 1993. And when I left depot in 1993, the fall before, we took a holiday back east to the Maritimes, my wife and the kids and I. And we flew into Ottawa, so we drove through the Maritimes. And New Brunswick is a beautiful province, as you well know. And I had my wife convinced when we got back to Regina that September of '92 that we should take a transfer to New Brunswick. My wife is from Manitoba. All her family's in Manitoba. Her sister is married to an RCMP officer member who's in Manitoba. But I had her convinced that when staffing came around that fall, early in the new calendar year, that we'd go to New Brunswick. And of course, the training officer of the day said, yeah, he came out of J Division, and he said, well, we'll arrange that for you, not a problem. And so staffing came around, and my wife changed her mind. And we think we run the world as members of the force, but we really know that we tend to be influenced by our better half, and we do what our spouses want. So I went to staffing at Depot Division and said, I'd like to go back to Manitoba. And so that I got offered some pretty good places going back to Manitoba because I had spent enough time in the province in different areas. And I ended up going to a place called Lac-des-Bonny, and because nobody else wanted to go there. And it had just been subject of a huge MR managerial review, and there was real morale issues. I didn't know that on my way there. I shouldn't say that. I got a phone call from a buddy in Manitoba when he heard I was going to Lac-des-Bonny. He told me the whole story. He said, "You're crazy." But we went there, and I spent 4 years there. And in Lac-des-Bonny, what you do is you do all the fly-ins. So we had three isolated First Nation communities on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. So we'd take a police plane to go to work. It would drop us off in the community, and we'd spend 4 days there. And if the weather was good, we'd go out after 4 days. If not, we got sort of fogged in or snowed in, and we'd stay until the plane could get us out. And so the Poplar River, Barons River, and Blood Vein are the three communities on the east side of Lake Winnipeg that we used to police by aircraft. We'd have our patrol cabins and trailer in there, of course. And, so I did that for 4 years, and I absolutely loved that. That was fantastic. I policed and worked in a lot of places, and the vast majority of people, the vast majority of time, are good people. Whether you're dealing with mainstream Winnipeg, a rural farming community, or First Nation community, my experiences were the same everywhere in terms of the people we policed. I enjoyed every community, and often I remember telling a neighbor her husband died. He was killed. He just died, and so I had to go and tell my neighbor her husband died, and those kind of things are difficult in small rural communities, and of course, not everybody is good at that. Some people just can't do those things. I was pretty good at talking to people about those kind of things in my experience, and she thanked me so much for being so kind and for looking after her and taking care of all her needs. And then, of course, my wife was reading the local paper, and she wrote a thank you letter to me for how I helped her through the tough time. Like, I had a lot of those kind of things happen to me. I remember a guy got killed. I don't know if this is the kind of stuff you're looking for, actually. When I was in Lac-des-Bonny, we had, there's a dam on one of the rivers, a hydro dam. They were taking a gate out, which weighs about 6 tons. And some guys was on a ramp, and they were trying to sort of guide it in, and it collapsed and it fell on them, and one of them was crushed by this thing and died instantly. And you have to take a train to get out there. And so I arrived to get on the train to get out there, and there's a woman that was just hysterical, going crazy, and nobody would talk to her, and she was the spouse of the man that died, and nobody would tell her that he was dead or what had happened, or she got a phone call from someone saying, "Your husband died." But she couldn't find anything out, and she was going crazy. And I remember talking to her, and the town administrator from Lac-des-Bonny actually was related to her, and she was there at the time. When I came back, I said, "I'm going to go out and find out what happened. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to tell you absolutely everything I know about what took place out there. So I'll answer all your questions." So I did, and the town administrator came afterwards and talked to me about the way the force helped her through that tough time, those things, because you just got to be direct and honest with people, and stay there with them and listen to them and try to help them as much as they can and make sure they have the support they needed to help them through those tough days. But on the plus side, I played a lot of sports in every town I ever policed. We'd get on a police plane and go to an inland community with all the guys from the detachment, and we'd go in there with our hockey gear, and of course, it's only natural ice, and the whole community would be out there, and you'd play hockey against them. And I remember one particular game, of course, after the game, we took one guy out with us because we had a warrant for him, but that kind of stuff. So I played ball and golf and hockey in almost every place, I think, in Manitoba over the course of the 20 so years I spent there in many, many different places. I returned in 1998 to Depot as a sergeant in the what was the Applied Police Sciences. So I was an instructor in the academic building in the old program, which was a really good training program. You know, I look at the training program of the 80s and 90s compared to my training experience as a recruit in 1974. It was miles ahead of my experience as a recruit. Because when we left Depot, we started to learn about police work. When the recruits from the recruit field training program graduated from Depot, there was an expectation that they were ready to do police work. And so I came back as a manager in the new program in Applied Police Sciences, which was really a blend of all the units that it used to exist in the recruit program under the umbrella of the Academic Center. And the cadet program had only been around for about 3 years, so it was still in the midst of growing and evolving. And so from '98 to my retirement, I worked at different levels at Depot, at the training academy, with the cadet training program, you know, from the staff sergeant in charge of the academic or the Applied Police Sciences building, to the officer in charge of the program, to eventually being the training officer responsible for all the training programs at Depot Division, which included the Police Dog Service Training Center at Innisfil in Alberta. And I watched as the program evolved and changed, and it got to the point where it was the envy of the police universe, quite frankly. The best police training program that I think exists anywhere in the world. Now, it's okay for us to feel good about something that is good, but it's something I always felt that all the members of the force should know about, the Canadians should know about, and that we should be okay to brag about, because we don't do enough talking about what's good about the Mounted Police. You know, whether people are looking for bad news story, they're not looking for good news stories. And there's so many good news stories about what took place from, say, '98 to 2010 in terms of that evolution of that program that caused so many people from around the world to want a piece of it. And then the LA story is a unique story, and we had a little, they were there during my tenure twice. They came the first time with a team of about 10 or 11 people. And they came with someone from the sort of the police standards for the state of California. So there's multiple major departments in the state of California, but they're trying to have a standard sort of level of training at all their academies. And so they were directed to us because LA was looking to change their training program. And mostly because, as I understand it, and having said that, I may not be completely accurate, although there is an article in our quarterly about it. They have had trouble in LA in terms of bridging the gap with their community. So we have a community-based problem-solving program, so they came to us to see how we did business. So they brought their firearms expert and their self-defense experts and their PT experts and their drill people. They brought everybody, and they spent about 10 days with us. And each of their experts would have followed our people around while they were providing training. And of course, when they were here, we were at our peak in terms of our gate, our troop gate, which is the number of cadet troops in training. So you're looking at anywhere from 40 to 55 troops in training at any one time through a fiscal year. So you have 20 plus troops in training. So there's lots of training taking place. So if you were a firearms guy, you could be at the range, and all day long there are cadet troops on the ranges. So you get to see a lot of training, a lot of training. It's not like every once in a while a troop comes in for firearms training, you get to see how they do business. And then about a year and a half, 2 years later, they came back a second time with 7 or 8 people. Only this time it was more focused because they were told that they had until the start of the next recruit class to make changes to the program. So they came back again to learn about how we did our business in terms of our fully integrated problem-based learning program. And they were getting down to the crunch, I recall, where, I don't know what the date was, let's say by the 1st of September, they had a class starting, and they had one educational specialist responsible for making all the changes in their training program, one specialist. And of course, that person or the administration trying to drive the change as directed by the chief were fighting all the resistance amongst the hardcore, kick-ass, take names kind of police trainers that have existed in all police organizations over time. And so what we ended up doing for them is we actually put one of our best people, our educational methodologist, our specialist, we put him on a plane and sent him there for 10 days to help her work through how to make that program look so it can fly when they start their class. So they came to us. They were here twice. They learned from us. And having said that, we learned lots from them too. They brought a lot of case studies and a lot of sharing of information in terms of some of their experiences that we could keep. And then we sent our specialists down there to help them fine-tune things and get it in place for them to get ready to roll out their first recruit class. And so that's a story that's a celebration of, I think, policing in Canada in general, and specifically the RCMP Training Academy and our organization that not too many people know about. The tradition of the history of the force, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. How we did business in the recruit program when I was a recruit, you know, in terms of the discipline, the deportment, the self-control, the regiment, like that is still such an integral part of today's cadet training program. That is so important in terms of the optics and what the RCMP is in terms of how people see it worldwide. And so as you move forward, you keep the best of that. You don't ever eliminate any of those things because discipline, deportment, self-control, there's, if you're in a riot troop, if you're part of an ERC team, if you're part of a special team, I mean, you still have to take orders and move and do things fast. The general police officer often has to be an interdependent problem solver who can manage things on his or her own and deal with the problem and meet it to the satisfaction of the community, making sure they keep public and police officer safety in mind. So those things come together in today's cadet training program, and it works so very well. And the discipline is still such an important part of it, and the old ways are still so important. You don't ever get rid of them, in my estimation. They're still important. I don't think you ever leave the force, actually. I mean, whether you're in it for 1 year or 36 years, I think it's part of who you are. I don't push it on anybody, by the way, but I do feel a responsibility to always give back. And you know, if in terms of the Veterans Association, I tried to get engaged and get involved because the more that are involved, the better it is. And the same with the Friends of the Mounted Police Heritage Center. If there's something I can do to help the Mounted Police Heritage Center out, or the core group of people, the Friends, who were instrumental in making this place a reality, then I do whatever I can to help out because, number one, I'm retired and I got lots of free time on my hands, and most importantly, I like to stay linked in to what has been my life. My life work is the Mounted Police.